Hello and good day to everyone, or good evening, depending on where you're zooming in from. We know we have folks in at least 5 time zones who have joined, and we really appreciate you taking the time out of your other activities to join us for what promises to be a very exciting discussion on building high-performing, resilient teams throughout your organization. My name is Beth Gillette, and I am the Chief People Officer at Well, a health technology and services company. I'm also one of the founders of the Institute for Contemporary Leadership, ICL, and a current executive board member here. For those of you who may be joining one of our events for the first time, the Institute is a think tank. It's also sort of an innovation lab and a learning center for developing leaders in this complex and disruptive environment that we, I think, inevitably find ourselves in these days. So as for today's topic, all of us work on some form of team, likely. In a lot of cases, we work on multiple teams. So this is something that has been a source of much discussion, research, and application practice for many years. But the interventions to really improve our team performance remain an area of study and really remain an area of potential in our organizations when we think about those levers of organizational performance that are yet to be fully tapped. So we're going to talk about that today, and to moderate our discussion and to introduce our esteemed panelists, I'd like to introduce you to the Institute's Chief Research Officer, who also serves as a partner at our sister organization, Contemporary Leadership Advisors, or CLA, and as the Chief Workforce Science Officer at Achievers Workforce Institute. So multiple appointments, very impressive. I bring you Dr. Natalie Baumgartner. Natalie, over to you.
Thank you so much, Beth. You know, Beth has her own powerful vantage point on creating resilience as she heads up that people organization, which really is focused on how all people thrive inside, in every aspect of their lives. And as you said, Beth, always on a team of some sort, whether personal or professional. So thanks very much. So lovely to have you with us today. And I'm so pleased to be with all of you today, facilitating our discussion on a topic that is top of mind for so many leaders: how to build high-performing, resilient teams, the powerhouse engine in the business arena. With me today, I have a wonderfully experienced and innovative group of panelists who are experts in the arena of HR, people leadership, and innovation, and who each have unique and powerful insights and tactics to share with us. So please welcome Guillermo Correa, the Managing Director of the Workplace Innovation Lab at SHRM, Andrea Brager, the Chief People Officer at True Blue, my colleague Dan Fisher, co-founder and Managing Partner at Contemporary Leadership Advisors, and Paula Day, bringing us her expertise from her 5 years as lead for global people development at VMware. And we can also send Paula a virtual congratulations on her brand new role this week at Renesas as Global Director of Talent. And you will see a document in the chat with more details and links to bios for each of our presenters. So many thanks to each of them for being here to share their expertise and wisdom with us. I also want to acknowledge and thank our fantastic sponsors for today's webinar. Thank you first to Achievers. Achievers is a global employee experience technology provider that uses best-in-class research and business practices to inform their all-in-one employee recognition, engagement, VOE, and communications platform and hub. As Beth mentioned, I hold a dual role, both at CLA with Dan and serve as the Chief Workforce Scientist at Achievers. So I can attest to the fact that Achievers truly serves their mission to change the way the world works by providing the very best state-of-the-art technology to empower the employee experience. And Achievers is a perfect sponsor for this session on developing high-performing, resilient teams, because recognition is a very strong driver of team member effectiveness. Regular, meaningful recognition from managers to their team members nearly triples employee engagement, productivity, sense of inclusion, and belonging, and intent to stay. So recognition is a team resilience super tool. If you want to learn more about Achievers, click the link in the chat and take a look at the most recent research report coming out of the Achievers Workforce Institute, their 2022 Culture Report on the Tech-Enabled Employee Experience. And a major thank you to our other fantastic sponsor, Rally Bright. Rally Bright is a performance management platform that helps organizations bring both measurement and understanding to the ways in which teams function. Now, a number of our panelists have had firsthand experience with utilizing Rally Bright to improve the well-being and the performance of their teams and their organization. So you're going to be hearing more about the powerful impact of Rally Bright in this session. And we've also included a link to Rally Bright in the chat as well. So thank you so much to both of our sponsors for making today's session possible. And now to the topic at hand, the importance of ensuring that our teams are empowered to be highly resilient in this evolving world of work. I think there's really no question that teams are that engine inside organizations. When they're running efficiently and effectively, there is a direct and an exponential impact on organizational productivity and performance. However, teams typically do not reach the highest levels of effectiveness without support. Many team managers, though we know well-intended, need assistance in determining and delivering on the components that make teams thrive. And yet, HR organizations, as you all know better than we, have been stretched far too thin, both in terms of bandwidth and budget, when trying to provide custom support across teams inside their organizations. So in this current moment of time, where companies we know are faced with a tightening labor market and simply just the need to do more with less, having teams that are functioning at an optimal level is more critical than ever before. And this reality then begs the question, what can and should organizations be focused on to ensure that their teams are resourced to be highly resilient and high performing in this new work paradigm? And that's exactly what we're going to talk about in our session today. Each of our panelists brings a unique set of expertise, a unique lens to this quest to understand what makes for teams that will not only survive, but thrive in the business arena that we're navigating today. So with that, let's jump in. If you have questions that come up along the way, please put them in the Q&A box located at the bottom of the Zoom window, and we will do our best to address them either along the way or during our Q&A session at the end. Now, we're going to bounce about a little bit with our panelists, but I want to ask my colleague, Dan, to kick us off by sharing a bit about what he's seeing through his unique lens as an outside consultant who works a great deal with teams across a wide variety of organizations and industries. So Dan, I want you to share this lens with us. Given your expertise as an external consultant supporting senior executives and leadership teams, what are you seeing happening in the world of teams and team development inside companies today?
Great. Thanks, Natalie. And you articulated it so nicely in framing up the context that we're operating in. And I have seen most definitely an increase in companies wanting to focus on the teams and definitely applying a greater share of wallet from what we've seen in terms of where they're placing their bets on having the biggest impact within their organizations using that budget. And what we've seen is this playing out with companies assessing their teams much more in order to really calibrate and understand where they're at. More team building offsites and virtual offsites. We've never personally been busier, and we know from our colleagues and competitors at other firms, same thing. And there's been a lot more ongoing team coaching following these typical team building programs, not the usual one and done. And then finally, what we've also seen both for ourselves and within others, within organizations, that there's a greater integration of team development capabilities and practices in larger scale leadership development programs. So not only are you training the leader, the executive in the organization, but you're focusing them very specifically on moving the needle with getting their teams to be more resilient and higher performing. If you can indulge me, let me just share a couple of reasons why I'm seeing this. What are the key drivers? And this is based both on the observations that I've had with all the teams that we work with at our firm, our institute, but also looking at data from a much larger data set of companies that are calibrating themselves through assessments. So one of the key drivers is that a lot of teams are really struggling with collaboration. And this is coming straight out of the hybrid workplace models that are now the norm within teams, within organizations. And there's definitely a learning curve. And some teams are doing it great, but quite a few are really struggling with this. The other interesting thing is that we've seen impaired connections between team members. So it was interesting during the pandemic, we generally saw an uptick in connectedness. Sort of people rallied around, pulled together, and whereas we thought maybe there was going to be a real struggle, um, there was a high degree of connectedness and cohesiveness, and managers were more focused on this than than at other times. But now that it's been around for a long time, I think there was COVID fatigue, and there's just a people are finding probably they're getting winded, and they're struggling more with those connections. So there's a greater need for this sort of team development focus and coaching because those connections are being frayed. And part of what we've seen actually in the teams that are thriving is they have a really good, clear understanding of their purpose and mission as a team. And the ones that, if you dig down and really explore the degree to which people do have that understanding and alignment around purpose, the ones that don't, we find, are really struggling. So one more reason to really focus on the teams. And also with our increased focus and valuing of diversity, equity, and inclusion. You mentioned earlier, Natalie, just the overall sense of belonging being so critical. And you can come at that in different ways. You can come at that from the way Achievers does and a lot of the recognition work they do, but also it becomes just all the more critical for teams to be inclusive and have everybody be able to come with their full authentic self and be able to contribute at their best. And it's interesting, John Maxwell's old adage that people don't leave companies, they leave managers. I feel like you can add to that people don't leave companies, they leave teams. So if you have a inclusive, strong, cohesive, resilient team, your retention of those team members is going to be greatly enhanced. And related to that, one of the observations that I've made is that with the war for talent being hotter than it ever has over the last few years, it's actually made swapping out poor team performers a little bit more challenging than it had been historically. Absolutely critical to make sure you have the right people on the team. And bad actors, poor performers, if you're not able to help those folks take it to the right level, you're probably smart to be replacing them and repositioning them in a better place in the organization or outside the organization. But given the level of complexity and disruption that characterize the company's environments, I think some leaders are gun shy about replacing folks during this time. So it makes it all the more critical that you create the right culture on the team to perform the team, because I'm sure everybody here knows that if you've got a poor culture on a team, it doesn't matter if you remove one person or even a couple of people. If that culture isn't changed when the new people come on that team, you're going to find yourself in a similar place on that. Just a couple more notes, and then I'm going to shut up. I know we have a lot more people with insights and experiences to hear from, but the thing that we have found that the really strong team coaches are doing, whether they're internal coaches from the company, external consultants are bringing in, is that they're really creating a vigilant awareness within the teams on what really matters for resilience and high performance, making sure that everybody understands those, the significance of those, they track those, and then they apply new capabilities, new behaviors, ways of doing things to improve. And most importantly, that they spend time reflecting on this and thinking about, how's that going? Is this really moving the needle? How can we get 10% even better? And we find the folks that are doing that are thriving. It's not the common. It's something where it's less common. And as the companies, and I think we'll hear from some of our colleagues on the panel, as they're trying to lean into the whole democratization of coaching and touching many more people in the organizations than just the C-suite and C-1 or 2 down. They're looking to build up internal muscle within their companies, whether it's the L&D team, whether it's the HRBPs who want to be team coaches. They are doubling down on trying to build those muscles internally so that they'll have the resources to touch many of the teams in their organizations. So more than you ever wanted to know about what I'm seeing right now in the organizations.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that, though, because I think it gives us all a window into some commonalities in terms of the experience that people leaders, C-suite executives are having across organizations around the globe in terms of setting their organizations up for success and setting their teams up for success. And the reality is that this is a complex world that organizations are having to navigate through factors that, simply didn't exist several years ago. And I love what so many things that you share, but particularly this last point about democratizing the necessity and the provision of development and support for teams and team managers, so that these are the folks doing the work, right, of organizations, and that they all have access to the kind of support and nurturing that they need, which actually makes me want, it's a great segue into talking with you, Paula, because I know that you disseminated a full-scale team effectiveness program across VMware over a period of time. And I'd love if you can tell us a bit about the problem that you were solving, which I think will give color to what Dan just shared with us. And then, how your program impacted the way that teams operate across the organization. And then perhaps looking back, what are some challenges that you managed through that might help others as they too work to democratize and bring coaching and development to their teams as well?
Yeah, thanks, Natalie, and hi everybody that's on the call. Very quick context. So I was working with a company called VMware, software vendor, 37,000 people globally. So we had over 5,000 teams. And I'm mentioning that specifically because scale turned out to be one of the challenges. We were transforming our business model quite significantly. And that meant that what were siloed teams and siloed business functions had to start working more closely with each other. So when we talk about cross-functional collaboration, that actually became quite an important aspect of the success of the business transformation. What we were finding as we stepped into that was that, one, we didn't actually have a culture of team development. It wasn't part of our development thinking across the organization. And it's interesting, Dan mentioned about team development capabilities and practices, and there was an assumption that we're in a team, we know how to be a team, but actually we discovered, especially through the use of Rally Bright, that we didn't. So creating that sense of we need a different aspect of the culture. Scale, so just the number of teams, plus the impact of remote working, because all of this was going on during COVID, made it quite tricky to really, where do we start, who do we engage? And also then just, getting the attention of the leaders, because they were busy with everything else, with the transformation. And because this wasn't seen as a priority, there was an assumption that we know how to do this. It was hard to get their attention. So what we did was we decided we'd start with senior leaders who really recognized it was critical for team success. And we worked really closely with them. And we used the Rally Bright platform and assessment to really help put some objective, neutral data on the table, because that assessment is the team talking about themselves. So it's not anybody else's opinion. It's not subjective outside of the team. And so we worked really closely with up to, I think, about 50 teams over time, over a 2-year period. And we call that the high touch model. And we use that to identify what are the real problems that really focusing on team development can solve. And how do we then create a language that creates consistency around team development? And then also how do we then scale that? So what are, because we weren't scaled up, to be honest, to be able to take this to 5,000 teams all at once. So we started looking at how can we take some of the simple key things, such as purpose. So for example, Dan mentioned purpose. Most teams assume they know their purpose as a team, but they don't express it. They don't talk about it. They don't define it and agree on it. So it's a huge assumption and causes a lot of problems. So we found that from the Rally Bright data and from the reality of the discussions. And then we were like, how do we take that to all the other teams? Just a very simple thing. And we did it through a team playbook around get together as a team and really talk about your purpose. Another big challenge which we weren't able to address was actually about goals in team. Most members in teams have individual goals, but there weren't any team goals. So there was nothing, the performance lens and the metrics were not holding them together. And those individual goals were often pulling the team members apart. And so one of the biggest challenges, honestly, Natalie, is how do you get a team to agree on a goal that's not been set for them outside of their regular metrics, but they feel adds value and they can connect to. And then psychological safety, I think, was probably one of the most important ones, because you can't address the purpose and the goals and even the acceptance of the Rally Bright data if the team aren't trusting each other. And we did start to bump up against biases in groups, out groups within the team. And so that is probably the biggest challenge. If I was going to say there's one thing, you've got to start thinking about how do you create psychological safety within the team early so that they will more openly step into the rest of the work that they need to do.
Yeah, Paula, speaking on that note, did you land on any particular tactics that you felt were effective in achieving that goal of creating a really safe container for your teams to do that work?
We did. We had one particular exercise, which I'm sure quite a few people on the call are probably familiar with. It's called the River of Life. It's an exercise where a member of the team stands up and they create a visual representation. And we use a river because it's got curves, and each curve was a critical point for them around making a decision, either personally or professionally. And so we got them to create these visuals and then share their stories with each other. And we had an incredible shift in the way that people viewed each other. And they absolutely loved this getting to know each other. The leader always had to go first. And we encouraged the leader to share as much as possible. And we found that teams have continued using that. When new team members come in, the leader asked them can you put your story together and come and share it with the team? And it gave them a completely different perspective to get to know each other, compared to the way they talk in work. So that was probably the first exercise that we found really had significant and consistent impact.
Yeah, that's great. And I think it's so helpful to hear things, approaches that have truly worked inside organizations. Has anyone else on the panel had, speaking of psychological safety, had a particular experience with building psychological safety, either on your own team or inside your organization, or with others that while we're here want to share for folks to add to their toolbox?
I'd be happy to chime in on that one, Natalie. Psychological safety, and Paula, you mentioned that purpose, and sometimes having goals or alignment where the purpose or a goal is set without the team being a part of that. So one of the things that we've done, and this is a question set that a very wise person shared with me once, but it always gets to the root of the problem, which is asking a team, what's everybody thinking, but nobody's willing to say, and giving them the space. And sometimes depending on the culture in the group and what's going on, we may ask a leader to step out for a certain point so that people can really get their thoughts out. But as people start to share, it's being open, hearing what they're saying, not trying to counter any suggestion or refute what something's saying, but just really hearing it and then taking that back to the team and figuring out how we can slowly start to solve those things so that people hear and see that their feedback is having an impact and that it's driving things forward and making things better for the team.
It's great. That's a great a great insight and a great question to ask. And I think we, the more we have these, real world tools and approaches, the better armed we are to truly have an impact, to not simply talk about a concept that's very important, but to bring it to fruition, which I think we all know working inside organizations is much more easily said than done. So I love that question. I've heard you mention it before, Andrea, and it's one that stuck with me for sure. Andrea, let's stick with your experience. Can you share a bit about the challenges that you were facing at True Blue with team leaders that then inspired you to develop what I know is a systematic approach to really creating what feels to me like a culture that truly supports team health, and talk about the tactics that you incorporated to really make that program successful?
Yeah, you bet. So, I think we've all been a part of or seen a project or a team where things just don't seem to be firing on all cylinders. We had that happen with a team who was working on a project that was incredibly visible, highly impactful, and we had some of the best talent in the company working on this team, but things just weren't clicking, and deliverables were starting to slip, and we needed to figure out what was going on, and we needed to do it incredibly quickly. Natalie, like you mentioned, we don't have a ton of resources, so we had to find somewhere to start very quickly. So enter Rally Bright. They came in to help us quickly assess the team so that we had somewhere to start from that was significant. And what our results showed was that we had some opportunities related to collaboration, but more importantly, around alignment and role clarity and communication. So going back to what Paula talked about too, which is that purpose and alignment, we had some gaps there. And so once we had our assessment from Rally Bright, we dug a bit deeper, and we used those as a jumping off point for us to have some focused feedback sessions where we could get a bit deeper and understand the root causes and understand the experiences that people were having on the team a little bit more. And again, through those conversations, the themes of alignment, confusion in the roles that each person played, how decisions were going to be made on the team, and even some concerns around psychological safety were coming up. So at that point, we knew we needed to take a step back and bring the team together to help them build a strong foundation. And Dan, this goes back to what you were talking about a little bit, which is bringing the team together in the process and helping them to talk about the culture that they wanted to see on the team. So for this, we use a structure that's called the Culture Canvas, and it's from Fearless Culture. It's an easy download that's free. And the tool really helps teams to define what their ideal culture looks like, but also helps to bridge some of those gaps to see where there might still be some areas of opportunity. As the team focused first on the emotional culture for the team, we wanted to jump right into the deep end, which is right into psychological safety. We knew to get through the rest of the culture map, we needed people to feel free and open to be able to talk about what was on their mind. And we got really specific about, what can we do to encourage everybody to speak up, and then also share ideas for how we can promote that candor and participation across the team. But first, we actually needed to work a little bit on removing some of the stigma that comes with risk taking and with failure. So we started to talk about it more and more, not to rehash the missteps and not to make somebody feel guilty that we kept talking about an error, but it was more forward looking around, what did we learn? How are we going to apply this going forward? And how can we share these learnings with others so that we can prevent any of these mistakes or any of these errors or delays from happening in the future? And, it started much like, we've talked about, it started with the leader sharing first about a mistake or an error or something that they had made. And as we start to talk about it more and more, you could almost see like the weight lifting from people's shoulders as they felt like they could come forward and talk about a delay, an issue, a snag that we hadn't planned for. We the team really wanted to have that space where they could question and learn in a really safe way as the team was coming together for the first time. I don't want to talk through the whole Canvas piece, but there are a couple of other areas that we really dove into for this particular team that seems to resonate, especially with this conversation. And one was making sure that we were clear on how did decisions get made on the teams? Who's empowered to do so? What's in their purview? Who can and can't stop or accelerate things? Because we were seeing just a lot of spinning and people were not really sure where they could drive things. And then also we talked a lot about rituals, meaning how do we commit as a team to celebrating our people, celebrating our work, our culture? What does that look and feel like for the team? And how do we want to be there for each other in those ways? And then the last piece, which again, I feel like a broken record here, was getting really laser focused on the priorities. Once we had that, we were all driving in the same direction. We were all, rowing in the same direction, however you want to say it. But as the team was all super focused on what we were looking to drive, the deliverables started to really come together as we were all very clear and very focused on what we were needing to deliver as a team. And from that point on, the strength of the team, the commitments of the team all started to come together and started to drive some really strong results.
Wow, I love that connection between really what I'm, hearing as a theme of this sort of the humanity of the workplace. And I think for one, that's one of the gifts that's come out of the pandemic, is that the humanity has come charging forth, front and center, both in its, grace in terms of how we support one another, and also in its challenge of just, how difficult it is and how to show up fully at work. And what I see this commonality that really Dan, Paula, and Andrea, you're all talking about is ways that organizations that you all are making space for that humanity, for vulnerability. I love, actually, I scroll past here, this comment that magic happens when we lean into our vulnerability. And, that came through the chat. And I think that's just so very true. And we've gotten this invitation to do that. And then you put, Andrea, this structure and system around, opening the door for that vulnerability, and then utilizing the feedback that came through. And Paula, you did the same. And that is, I think where change happens. And it also, not only does it have a tremendous impact on how teams function, it also has a great impact on, of course, productivity, but on a tenure and intent to stay, and people feeling like this is an organization that really actually cares about me as a human, as a person, wants to know my thoughts, but then operationalizes that into change and process that makes my life better at work and makes us all better at what we do. So I love that. And thank you for sharing all of those details. That it made me think about you, Guillermo, because you bring this unique expertise to the world of teams, given your role at SHRM Innovation Lab. So I have some questions for you about technology and tools and how we can use those to empower teams. But can you first just tell all of us a bit about the Innovation Lab at SHRM? Because I think many folks, I certainly wasn't familiar with the lab, and it's really exciting what you're doing there. And then would love to hear about what you're seeing in terms of innovation around team development, manager effectiveness, perhaps these concepts of psychological safety and purpose and so on. So would love to turn it over to you to hear your insights.
Sure, absolutely. And thank you for having me here. And so just to tell you very briefly about SHRM Labs, SHRM's Workplace Innovation Lab. We support SHRM in elevating HR as the thought leader in workplace innovation. And the way that we view it is, if anybody should be leading that conversation, it should be the people who know the workplace the best, HR, right? Before I get into the question that you're asking, I do want to piggyback on what Paula and Andrew were talking about, because we recently published a report in partnership with Gap International, right? And the whole topic around, and actually Dan even brought it up, right? The whole topic around inclusiveness and psychological safety. Well, guess what? This report, and it was titled Organizational and Employee Resilience Research. The key finding from that report was that resilient organizations are inclusive ones. Okay, so if you're not providing that psychological safety for your teams, guess what? Your organization is not going to be resilient. And this was a report that was done with over 620 senior leaders as well as employees, and I'll go into that in a little bit later on. But that's a very, very critical point to bring up. And if you think about it, it makes sense. I mean, for a long time, we've been talking about DEI. It's been well proven that organizations that truly believe in DEI perform way better, and not just perform way better, the revenue is there to prove it, right? So in a way, I'm kind of tired of people just talking about the DEI around the edges, right? I mean, the data is clear. If you are an organization that really supports DEI, you're going to have better numbers from a revenue perspective. Done, right? So let me go back into your question, right, around some of the technologies that we're seeing out there. I'm so glad that two of my co-panelists here are using Rally Bright, because we're also using Rally Bright. My team in particular, and the reason why we decided to use Rally Bright was just to, we're in the business of testing technologies out, right? And we wanted to see what kind of results we would be able to get from Rally Bright. It's still too early for us, but one thing I can tell you is that one key piece of knowledge that I can tell you about Rally Bright is that you're able to very quickly determine, okay, what is it that the team feels good about, and what is it that we need to work on, right? And so, it's too early for us to provide any data as far as the results that we're getting, but at the very least, we now know like a path that we can take. When you think about Rally Bright, it's a tool. It's a very easy tool that allows measurement, diagnosis, and ways in which you can improve your team. It allows the team to get really focused on the areas that can have an immediate impact, right, in what you're doing, because at the end of the day, you want to be able to know what's going on and then very quickly act on it, right? And then finally, like I was saying, it's too early for us to tell what the progress is like, but you are going to be able to see that progress over time, right? So Rally Bright is definitely one of the tools out there that we've looked at. The other tool that I think it would be good for the audience to know about is a company called Unboxed. Okay, Unboxed is a company that helps identify and capture employment feedback in real time, which means that managers are then able to get insights in real time and not wait for that 6-month or that 12-month employee survey to come back when, if somebody was ticked off about XYZ, thing that happened at work, and you're dealing with it 6 months later, like that employee might be gone and may have been a great talented employee, right? So you want to be able to address those things as they're happening. One of the great things about this tool is that it allows for customized digital check-ins, right? Where the manager or HR can come in and set up the digital check-ins to be daily, weekly, or monthly. The employees go in and it takes less than a minute for the employee to provide the feedback. And then once again, the manager is getting insights and the feedback right away on what they can do around, sentiment, performance, motivation, how the team overall is doing. So those are the two technologies that really come to mind, especially given, what we're talking about here.
Yeah, I think those, I first of all, thank you so much for giving us a window into SHRM Labs, because I think Innovation Lab, because I think it's just an incredible resource for all of us working with organizations and teams, and love the research that you're doing. And thank you for sharing those, resources. And, we know that there's such great tools out there to address team effectiveness. Those you've mentioned, Guillermo, certainly Rally Bright. We know, there's been some questions about recognition as well. And so, in terms of the impact on team efficacy and so on. So lots of data to share, lots of resources out there. And I also wanted to acknowledge your, the data you shared around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And when we talk, the fact that when we talk about psychological safety and making teams places where people can do their very best work, that's one of the first steps that we need to take, which is developing an environment where individuals feel that they can be who they are, be acknowledged and honored and respected for who they are, and on every single level and every permutation, and that's when people are able to come together and be truly effective. I know that we have so many amazing questions in the chat. I love that. There was a question about this, what is an approach to create the kind of psychological safety that every single one of you has talked about. And Guillermo, you just hit on, particularly as it relates to DEI. And I wonder, Dan, if you could share a little bit about, have you seen organizations, do the work to empower leaders to create that container of psychological safety for their teams? And if so, what have you seen as some of the best practices out there?
Sure. Thanks. Thanks for raising that. It's interesting because I feel like it's harder than ever for teams to create that psychological safety. And what you need to do for it, in my experience, is this is where the team leader really needs to step up. And I think as Andrea was alluding to this, they need to be able to show vulnerability, be able to bare their neck to the team so that they're modeling that and they're showing that this is how we want to operate, and it is safe to do that here. And the other thing that plays into this, in both Paula and Andrea touched on it, is this whole idea around growth mindset. So I always like to share with my clients that I'm the worst offender of everything that I will coach them on. And I oftentimes have to shift from a fixed mindset about a team, about an individual, into a growth mindset and appreciate their true potential to grow and change. And there's a lot of cynicism that you'll meet, particularly in a team that struggled for a long time and has adopted a fixed mindset. So in terms of creating that psychological safety, part of that is shifting their mindset to one of growth. And then the idea of really being able to be vulnerable in this. Now, I mentioned that I see this as harder than ever. And part of that, and this is not everybody's favorite topic of conversation, but societally, in our society right now, we have a lot of schisms. And we have a lot of people who are really not open to tolerating other people for various different reasons, ideologically, all our isms. And it really does make it tough right now, in certain instances, at least domestically, to create that safety where people really trust each other to be accepted, and to be able to, fully engage. And there's lots of boundary management around this, but I just want to acknowledge that it's not easy. It's hard. And I think it'll continue to be, and maybe get even harder.
I am glad you're speaking to just the challenge. I think every single one of you have shared these really powerful approaches you've taken to setting teams up for success in this environment. And you've all acknowledged the challenges in doing that, right? And you make it look easy. And we know the truth is it's not easy. So what we're trying to do is provide, right, those tools and the insights that can help scaffold, every one of us doing this important work at organizations, and have it not feel overwhelming. And at the same time, acknowledge the fact that this is, it's not an easy lift to really create a space in organizations for teams feeling, and team members, employees feeling like they can really develop themselves individually and then come together as a team to do that work together. And so, yeah, I thank you, Dan. There's a question in, I'm going to sort of move us towards our Q&A because we have such great questions in there. So one of the questions that came up in a few different places, both in our chat and our Q&A, has to do with matrix and cross-functional teams. Any of you, particular Andrea, Paula, did you find that if you did that work, the work you did that you rolled out to your teams, do you have any insights that you can share about how that might look similar, different for those matrix or cross-functional teams?
So I'll jump in very quickly. I think defining what that cross-functional team is always very important. And in the Rally Bright assessment, that question around what is the purpose of this team, quite a few of the people came back and said, I wasn't quite sure which team I was answering for. And so I think, and it was a great learning when you talk about learning, being very clear up front, which team are we talking about today? What team are we on? Is really important. It sounds very simple, but just being really clear about defining which team for what purpose. And I think in cross-functionally, it became way more important because teams do tend to batten down the hatches, especially in the virtual space, and focus on the work and not so much on the benefits of the relationship. And one of the things that definitely came out of the teamwork was the identification. We did some exercises. So it's not just about the assessment, it's what are the work practices that you step into. And we did some work around identifying who else do you need to be considered to be part of your extended team, and bringing those conversations into the table and the challenges that it might, well, I'm not working with them, well, I want to, and being more open to the point of, vulnerability. Where have you had problems? Where have you not? So I think there's an awful lot around breaking down some of the myths and assumptions, and especially when it comes to cross-functionality, and really defining what value does that then bring for the team.
Right. I love the idea of breaking down the myths, right? And thinking more holistically about who we are doing our work inside organizations, right? Is it, are we as a leadership team? Is it me as a leader of my department? Is it me as an individual who sits on a main, a team perhaps, but then also has, either a matrix role or sits on project teams. And, we know from there's really good rigorous research that demonstrates that if we can take a few of these simple principles that we've been talking about today, not necessarily easy, I'm not saying easy, but, quite straightforward principles, and apply them across the way that we do teams inside our organizations, then we end up in the right place, right? It starts to, in a way, matter less which team we're talking about. If we know that the reality is that as organizations, we need to, back to Dan's earliest point about culture, that if and when we incorporate these tenets about how teams function best into how we do things, into our culture inside our organization, then it starts to matter a little bit less as to which team we're talking about in that moment.
If I can just double click for a second on Paula calling that out, that is a critical question that we ask at the very front end of what's the team here. And oftentimes I tend to work with senior executive teams with the CEO and his team, and they'll tell me like, oh yeah, it's this 20-person group right now. They're all my direct reports, or they dotted lines into me. So this is my executive leadership team. And so usually after a number of conversations, either with the CEO or with the team, we really start to appreciate that this is their leadership council. It's one of the most critical governing bodies within the organization. It's where a lot of hive mind information comes in and gets disseminated out. So the hive can go and do great work. But usually within that 20-person group, there are multiple teams, including probably the CEO's core team that's looking cross-organization, making enterprise-wide decisions, and that there's within that, we also talk about forming, dissolving, reforming teams that exist that are constantly coming together in order to get the work done. And when we talk a lot about agile, adaptive organizations, they do this really well. And Natalie, your point about the fundamental mindsets, understandings, and behaviors that if you're on a team, you're engaging in those, it'll work across that. Your working groups will be more effective. But as people are constantly reforming teams, it is really critical, because all the more so.
And by the way, if you don't mind me jumping on what Dan is saying, right? So going back to the study that I was mentioning that SHRM and Gap International published recently, right? The whole competency of building alignment, right, which goes with work culture, is extremely important, right? And that was the key characteristic that came out from this study that we did, that those that are able to produce results beyond expectations are the ones that are clearly aligned and have this team culture that's been built. So it's clearly something that you need to have a resilient team that's going to outperform the competition.
I'm so glad you shared that data, Guillermo. And I think it's just a great focusing mechanism to say, if we come up with, the principles, these tenets that we apply, starting to Dan's, your point, with the first team, right? And then replicate and scale throughout our organizations. If we keep it simple but powerful, then we see great results, right? And I think that's in my seat. I often am reminding I speak with like Dan, many C-suite executives and CHROs, chief people officers, and really empathize with, like, this can feel so overwhelming. And if we start simple, don't underestimate the incredible impact. A few simple tenets, a few simple tactics can take when they are disseminated, more widely across an organization, and then build from there. And I think if that's, we want to leave our attendees with these great, golden nuggets that you've all shared with them, and the reminder that, starting to do some things in a really consistent way is far better than feeling like you have to boil the ocean all at once. And I think all of the stories you've all shared are really testament to that. At risk of putting us over, I won't, but very briefly, there's a question in the Q&A, and then I'll bring us to a close, around how do you measure effectiveness, right? So how do you know if this is working? So any of you that have seen, heard, done this work with teams, can you share just like a popcorn, a little bit of info on how you evaluate, like, is this working? Are we doing okay?
I'm happy to chime in on that just briefly. So from measuring the effectiveness, I think there are a few different things. One is we continue to pulse and assess our teams to see how they're functioning, how they're working together. Also looking to see, right now is such a hot talent market. Are we retaining our people? Are we retaining our best talent? And are they sticking with us because of the environment that we have? And this is probably going to be controversial, but even, are we getting boomerang employees back? Did we have an employee who left us thinking the grass was greener and then come back and said, wow, the culture, the team, the dynamics here are really strong. And I miss that, and I want to be a part of that. And even willing to walk away from a higher pay to come back to a place that has that really strong culture.
And by the way, the number one issue that HR is dealing with is retaining and recruitment of talent. Make no mistake about it. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Critical.
Yeah. Thank you so much, all of you, for. Oh,
Natalie, can I, as is my my tendency, sorry, I just want to interrupt for 1 second and just acknowledge what you said about adopting a discipline, a framework, a model for the company to use, and ideally it's used throughout so everybody speaks the same language, is really critical. And I know that the people on this panel have been using Rally Bright and their framework and really enjoyed it. But I just want to acknowledge that I've been doing this for, sadly now, over 20 years. And I've used like them all. I've used Hackman and Wegman's model. I've used Gordy Curfey's rocket model, Lencioni's model. They're all great. And frankly, I pull on all of them in different aspects, the work that I'm doing with the team. And so as long as you're working with a proven, research-driven, good, effective model, I feel like you're in great shape. And I will say that we found the Rally Bright model be super helpful in integrating a lot of those things, but I don't think you need that in order to be, to really have impact.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And it goes, in keeping with this idea that pulling the pieces that make sense for you and starting to employ them inside your organization, whether it's a tool, the ones we've mentioned, others, a different, theoretical approach, whatever tactic that you take inside your organization, simply knowing that the health and well-being of teams and giving a team support is so critical. Is if that's, gets up on the top 5 list of keep you up at night, and I hope none of you are up at night, but if you are, team, the extent to which your teams are functioning well and feel truly supported, we know is critical in terms of organizational health and performance, and to Guillermo's point, in terms of retention as well. So thank you so much to all of our attendees for joining us today to examine all of these ways in which organizations can scaffold and then scale the development of these really resilient, high-performing teams. And of course, a tremendous thank you to each of our panelists for you sharing your experience. I love that you shared your struggles too, and what inspires you. And, we'll post that document in the chat again, in case you missed it the first time. That includes links to each of our presenters, but also to the web pages and the reports that we referenced during our webinar. I know there was a question about the SHRM report, so we'll make sure we'll send you a little bit of follow-up information. We'll make sure to include the link to that as well. So feel free to grab that as a reference if you want to dive in. And last but not least, thank you to both Achievers and Rally Bright for sponsoring today's session, and for both of you, those organizations, to changing the world, the way the world works through technology. That's, I think, really transforming the employee experience. If you're inspired to keep learning about ways to engage and retain employees in this new era of work that, I see we're all doing together, please consider joining us for the Institute of Contemporary Leadership's Team Coach Training. The next session runs October 19th and 20th. There's also sessions in December and February, so lots of opportunity to elevate your team development strategy. The link to the register for those trainings is going to show up in the chat. And then, of course, please feel free to reach out to us at CLA if you have any questions we can answer about resilient, high-performing teams, or just whatever's top of mind for you as you navigate this evolving business landscape. Thank you so very much.